Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens in American hospitals during the early morning hours? When the lights dim, the hallways empty, and silence takes over. Today, I brought you 15 terrifying accounts from American nurses who experienced inexplicable situations during their night shifts. Real stories from real professionals that will make you think twice before walking through an empty hospital at night. From patients who came back from the dead to visits from entities that no one can explain. These stories will keep you up at night. Before we begin, if you enjoy real horror stories, don't forget to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. Share this with that friend who loves scary stories. And tell me in the comments if you've ever had a paranormal experience in a hospital. Let's begin. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I work as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit of a large hospital in Chicago for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you happened on a cold night in January 2019 and completely changed my perception of what exists beyond life. It was around 2:45 in the morning, that time when the hospital seems suspended in time, when everything gets too quiet and even the hum of medical equipment seems louder. I was caring for an 83-year-old patient named Harold Morrison, a Korean War veteran who had been admitted 5 days earlier with severe pneumonia and congestive heart failure. His condition was critical, and we all knew he didn't have much time left. That night, while I was making my rounds, I noticed that Mr. Morrison's heart monitor was showing irregular signs. I entered his room and saw that he was conscious, staring fixedly at the dark corner of the room near the window. "Mr. Morrison, are you okay?" I asked as I approached to check his vital signs. He didn't take his eyes off that corner and whispered in a weak but clear voice, "She came to get me. She finally came." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who came to get you, Mr. Morrison?" I asked, trying to follow the direction of his gaze, but I saw nothing but shadows. "My wife," he answered, with a soft smile on his face. "Margaret. She's right there, wearing that blue dress I loved so much. She says it's time to go home." I knew from the medical records that Mr. Morrison's wife had passed away 15 years earlier. I felt my heart racing. "Mr. Morrison, there's no one in the room but us," I said gently, checking the heart monitor which now showed a more pronounced arrhythmia. He finally looked away from that corner and stared at me with clear, lucid eyes, with no sign of confusion caused by medication or lack of oxygen. "Nurse Sarah," he said my name even though I was sure I had never introduced myself to him. "You're young and still have a lot of time ahead of you, but when your time comes, don't be afraid. They come to get us. They always come." Before I could respond, he turned back to look at the corner and extended his trembling hand toward that darkness. "I'm ready, Margaret. Let's go home." At that exact moment, all the lights in the room flickered, and I felt such a strong presence beside me that I instinctively took a step back. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees in a matter of seconds, and I saw my breath form a small mist in the air. The heart monitor started beeping frantically. "Code blue, room 312. I shouted, triggering the alarm, but something told me it was already too late. Within seconds, the medical team rushed into the room, and we began resuscitation procedures. We worked on Mr. Morrison for 23 minutes, but he never came back. When the doctor finally declared the time of death at 3:18 in the morning, everyone started leaving the room to fill out the paperwork and make the necessary calls. I stayed for a moment, as I always do, paying my last respects. That's when I noticed something that made me freeze. Mr. Morrison's right hand, which had fallen to the side of his body after our resuscitation attempt, was positioned in a specific way, as if he were still holding someone's hand. And even more disturbing when I approached to position it properly, before the funeral home came to pick up the body. I felt that his skin was strangely warm, almost hot, as if someone had really been holding his hand until seconds ago. But what really haunts me to this day was what I found when I returned to the room half an hour later to collect Mr. Morrison's personal belongings. In the corner of the room, exactly where he had been looking, there were wet footprints on the linoleum floor. Small, delicate footprints, from women's shoes, that weren't there before. I know because I had just cleaned that floor during my previous round. The footprints led from the window to the bed and then disappeared. They simply disappeared into thin air. I called security. We checked the hallway cameras, but no one had entered or left that room except the medical team during the code blue. Those footprints had no explanation. I never told this story to many colleagues because I know they'll think it was fatigue or imagination, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt in that room. Since that night, whenever a patient in the ICU starts looking at an empty corner of the room and smiling, I know that someone came to get them, and that doesn't scare me anymore. In fact, it comforts me to know that no one dies alone. Not really. My name is Jennifer Rodriguez, and I'm an emergency room nurse at a hospital in Houston, Texas, for 15 years. Working in the ER means seeing things that most people will never see in their entire lives. But what happened on a summer night in 2021 defies any logical explanation and haunts me to this day. It was a Friday night, around 11 o'clock, when the automatic doors of the emergency room opened and two paramedics came running in pushing a stretcher. On the stretcher was a young woman of approximately 25 years old, unconscious, with severe injuries. She had been found at the scene of a devastating car accident on Interstate 45. The car had rolled over several times and was completely destroyed. The paramedics informed us that she was trapped in the wreckage for almost 40 minutes before they could get her out. We took the patient directly to the trauma room. She had multiple fractures, severe internal bleeding, and head trauma. There was no identification with her, and the car's license plate had been torn off in the accident. We catalogued her as Jane Doe number 23. While the team worked frantically to stabilize her, I was responsible for monitoring her vital signs and administering medications as the doctor requested. Her blood pressure was dangerously low and her heart showed signs of failure. Suddenly, while the surgeon was trying to control the internal bleeding, the patient opened her eyes. It wasn't a gradual awakening, it was instant and complete. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me with a clarity and intensity that paralyzed me. Her lips moved, and even with the endotracheal tube, I could read perfectly what she was saying. "My baby. Save my baby." I looked confused at the doctor. "Is she pregnant?" I asked. No one had mentioned pregnancy. The doctor quickly did an abdominal palpation and ordered an emergency ultrasound. Within minutes, we confirmed that she was pregnant, approximately 7 months along. The baby was in acute fetal distress. "We need to do an emergency C-section now," said the obstetric surgeon who had been called urgently. "The mother won't survive anyway, but we can try to save the baby." The patient, who should have been completely unconscious from the amount of sedatives and painkillers she had received, squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Save him," she whispered, and tears began to stream from her eyes. "Please, save my son. Tell him his mommy loved him. Tell him every day." I felt my heart break. "We're going to save your baby," I promised, holding her hand. "I promise." She smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and then her eyes closed again. Her vital signs plummeted. While the obstetric surgeon performed the emergency C-section, we worked desperately to keep the mother alive. But it was clear we were losing the battle. At 11:42 at night, a small but perfectly formed boy was born. He cried immediately, a strong and healthy cry that filled the trauma room. At the exact moment the baby gave his first cry, the mother's heart monitor emitted a long, continuous beep. She had passed away. We all stood in silence for a moment, hearing only the newborn's cry. There was something deeply sacred and at the same time devastating about that scene. One life arriving exactly as another departed. I took the baby to the neonatal ICU, where he was cleaned and examined. Against all odds, he was surprisingly healthy for a baby born under such traumatic circumstances. I returned to the trauma room to help prepare the mother's body. That's when I noticed something strange. I had held her hand during her last conscious moments, and I clearly remembered that she wasn't wearing any jewelry. But now, on her left ring finger, there was a simple gold wedding band. I called another nurse. "Did you see this ring when she arrived?" I asked. The colleague looked confused. There was no ring. I personally removed all her jewelry when she arrived. She didn't have anything. I felt a chill. I picked up the ring and looked inside. There was an inscription engraved, "To my eternal love, Michael and Emma, together forever." The social worker was able to identify the patient through fingerprints 2 days later. Her name was Emma Patricia Whitmore, 26 years old. She was returning from a prenatal appointment when she had the accident. We managed to locate her husband, Michael Whitmore. When he arrived at the hospital and saw the baby for the first time, he cried uncontrollably. "We didn't know she was pregnant," he sobbed. Emma was keeping it a surprise for me. She was going to tell me that night at dinner. She had planned everything. My heart broke again. I gave him the ring. He held it in his trembling hands and looked at me confused. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was on her finger when we were preparing the body," I explained. "But that's impossible," he said, with tears streaming down his face. "Emma lost this ring 3 years ago. It fell into the ocean during our honeymoon in Cancun. We even bought a new one to replace it, but it was never the same. Emma always said she missed the original." I felt the air leave my lungs. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. Michael looked at the ring, then at the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib beside him. "It does make sense," he said calmly. "Emma always said that if anything happened to her, she would find a way to come back, even if, just for a moment, to say goodbye. She always kept her promises. That baby, who was named Daniel Michael Whitmore, is 5 years old now. Michael sends me photos of him every year on Emma's birthday. He's a beautiful and healthy child. And Michael says that every day he tells him how much his mother loved him, exactly as she asked. The ring is kept in a safe deposit box, waiting for the day when Daniel is old enough to understand its story. Sometimes, on quiet nights in the emergency room, I think about that brave woman who fought against death long enough to save her son. I think about how she knew, somehow, that she needed to tell us about the pregnancy. I think about that ring that shouldn't have been there. And I wonder how many small miracles happen every day in hospitals around the world. Miracles that we'll never know or fully understand. My name is Patricia Chen, and I work as an oncology nurse at a hospital in Seattle, Washington, for 20 years. Caring for terminally ill cancer patients has taught me a lot about the fragility of life and how people face their final days. But one specific patient taught me something that goes far beyond what medicine can explain. It was October 2020, during the height of the pandemic, when I met Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. a 78-year-old woman with advanced stage pancreatic cancer. She had been admitted for palliative care and didn't have much time to live. Maybe a few weeks at most. Mrs. Blackwood was different from other terminal patients I had cared for. She didn't show fear of death, didn't cry, didn't seem bitter. In fact, she was strangely at peace and even excited, which intrigued me. Eleanor, as she insisted I call her, told me that she had been a professional medium for over 50 years. She said she had always had the ability to see and communicate with the dead since childhood. People think I'm going to be scared when my time comes, she told me in one of our nighttime conversations. But I've already seen the other side thousands of times. There's nothing to fear, dear. It's beautiful there. I smiled politely, not wanting to disrespect her beliefs, but also not taking it too seriously. I had seen many terminal patients cling to different spiritual beliefs in their final moments, and I thought it was just a coping mechanism. Eleanor seemed to read my thoughts. You don't believe me, and that's okay, she said with a gentle smile. But I'm going to show you something that will make you rethink everything you think you know. She asked me for paper and pen. For the next 20 minutes, she wrote frantically, filling 3 complete pages. When she finished, she carefully folded the papers and put them in an envelope that she asked me to seal and date. Keep this in a safe place, she instructed, when I pass, and it won't be long now. Specific things will happen in the coming weeks. I wrote all of them in these papers. Don't open the envelope until at least 3 of the things I wrote have happened. Then you'll know I was telling the truth. I was intrigued, but skeptical. I agreed to keep the envelope, more to please her than because I really believed anything would happen. 5 days later, at 4:15 in the morning, Eleanor called me. I was on shift, and went immediately to her room. Patricia, dear, she said in a weak voice. The time is coming. They're here to get me. I looked around the room, but didn't see anyone. Who's here, Eleanor? I asked gently. My husband, Thomas. He passed 22 years ago. My sister Ruth, and my mother. Oh, Mama looks so beautiful. She's wearing that lavender dress she wore at my brother's wedding. She pointed to different corners of the room, describing people I couldn't see. But then something extraordinary happened. There's someone else here, Eleanor said, looking directly at the space beside me. Someone who's here for you, not for me. I felt my heart race. For me, an older woman, with...
My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm an emergency room nurse at a hospital in Detroit, Michigan, for 18 years. Working in the ER means seeing human tragedies every day, but some stay with you in a way that changes who you are forever. This is one of those stories. It was a rainy night in March 2018 when an ambulance arrived bringing an 8-year-old girl. She had been hit by a car while running across the street chasing her ball. The driver didn't see her until it was too late. The girl, who we later found out was named Lily Chen, was in critical condition when she arrived. Multiple fractures, severe head trauma, internal bleeding. The team worked on her for almost 2 hours, but her injuries were too severe. At 11:15 at night, the doctor declared her deceased. Lily's parents, who had arrived at the hospital half an hour earlier, were inconsolable. Watching parents lose a child is the worst part of my job, something that never gets easier no matter how many times you witness it. After the parents finally left the room, after saying their goodbyes, I began preparing little Lily's body to be taken to the morgue. It was around midnight, and the hospital was quiet. I was alone in the room with her. As I gently cleaned her face and arranged her hair, something inexplicable happened. The room's temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in the suddenly cold air. The lights began to flicker, and I heard a sound that made me freeze. It was the sound of a child singing softly. I looked around the empty room, my heart pounding. There was no one but me and Lily's body. But the singing continued, a sweet, childlike melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That's when I saw something I'll remember for the rest of my life. A soft, golden light began to form in the air above Lily's body. It wasn't a normal light. It was warm and pulsating, almost alive. And then, within that light, I saw the translucent silhouette of a small girl. It was Lily, but it wasn't her physical body. It was something more, something I don't have words to adequately describe. Lily's apparition looked at me and smiled, a radiant smile free from pain. She waved her hand, like a child waving to a friend, and then looked up as if she were seeing something wonderful above her. The golden light became brighter, and I had to shield my eyes. When I could look again seconds later, both the light and the apparition had disappeared. The room returned to normal temperature, and the lights stopped flickering. I stood there trembling, not from cold, but from a mixture of fear and wonder. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Extreme fatigue, stress, hallucination caused by strong emotions of the moment, but deep in my heart, I knew I had witnessed something real, something that science cannot explain. I finished preparing Lily's body and took her to the morgue. But that vision stayed with me. I didn't tell anyone at the hospital about what I had seen, afraid of seeming crazy or having them doubt my professional competence. 2 weeks later, Lily's parents returned to the hospital. They wanted to personally thank the team that had tried to save their daughter. When it was my turn to speak with them, Lily's mother, Mrs. Chen, held my hand and said something that made me shudder. "Nurse Thompson," she said with tears in her eyes, "I wanted you to know that on the night Lily died, she came to visit me in a dream. She was so happy, so at peace. She was surrounded by golden light and told me she didn't feel pain at the end. She said an angel in a green coat was taking care of her, and she wasn't scared. I looked down at my green nursing uniform, my heart racing." Mrs. Chen continued, "Lily said she sang her favorite song one last time before leaving. That little song she always sang when she was happy. I was speechless. The singing I heard, the golden light, the apparitions smiling and waving, everything fit together. Somehow in that moment between life and death, little Lily's soul had manifested. Not just to me, but also to her mother in a dream, bringing comfort and farewell. I hugged Mrs. Chen and this time let my own tears fall. I took good care of her, I promised. She wasn't alone. After Lily's parents left, I returned to the emergency room and continued my shift. But something had changed in me. That experience taught me that there are mysteries in this world that medicine cannot explain, that perhaps death is not the end we think it is, and that sometimes we are privileged enough to witness small miracles that remind us there is something greater than all of us. Since that night, I've been more attentive to the signs around me, especially when caring for patients in their final moments. And on quiet nights, when the hospital is silent and I'm alone with my thoughts, I can still hear the echo of that sweet children's song, reminding me that the innocence and joy of a child's soul transcend even death.
My name is Rebecca Harrison, and I've been working as a night shift nurse in the cardiac care unit of a hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, for 14 years. In all my years of nursing, I've learned that the heart is more than just an organ that pumps blood. Sometimes, I believe it holds memories, emotions, and connections that science can't fully explain. What happened in the winter of 2017 proved this to me in the most unsettling way. It was a Tuesday night in February, around 1:30 in the morning, when a 67-year-old man named David Fletcher was brought into our unit after suffering a massive heart attack. He had collapsed at home and his wife had called 911 immediately. By the time he arrived at our hospital, he had already been resuscitated twice by the paramedics. His condition was extremely critical. We stabilized him as best we could, and he was placed on life support while we waited to see if his heart could recover enough function to sustain him. His wife, Martha Fletcher, stayed by his bedside throughout the night, holding his hand and talking to him softly, even though he was completely unconscious. Around 3 in the morning, I gently suggested that she go to the waiting room to rest for a bit. She reluctantly agreed, making me promise to call her immediately if there was any change in his condition. About 20 minutes after Martha left, something strange began to happen. The monitors started showing unusual activity. David's heart rate, which had been steady with the help of medications, suddenly became erratic. But it wasn't the dangerous kind of erratic that would trigger alarms. It was almost like his heart was trying to communicate something. The rhythm would spike, then slow, then spike again in a pattern I had never seen before. I moved closer to check on him, and that's when I heard it. David, still completely unconscious, still on the ventilator, began making sounds. Not words exactly, but low, guttural sounds that seemed to come from deep within his chest. I quickly checked all his vitals to make sure he wasn't in distress, but everything seemed stable despite the odd heart rhythm. Then, clear as day, he spoke. His eyes remained closed, his body remained still, but his lips moved and words came out. "Tell Martha I'm sorry. Tell her about Caroline." I froze. His voice was weak but urgent, desperate even. I didn't know who Caroline was, but the way he said it made my blood run cold. "Mr. Fletcher," I said softly, trying to rouse him to consciousness. "Can you hear me?" But there was no response. He had fallen silent again, completely unresponsive. His heart rate normalized, and the strange pattern disappeared. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do with what I had just heard. Should I tell his wife? Was it just a random hallucination caused by his medications and the trauma his body had endured? But something about the way he had spoken, the urgency in his voice, even while unconscious, told me it was important. When Martha returned to the room an hour later, I hesitated before speaking. Finally, I decided I had to tell her. "Mrs. Fletcher," I began carefully, "something unusual happened while you were resting. Your husband spoke. He was still unconscious, but he spoke." Her eyes widened. "What did he say?" "He said to tell you he's sorry. And he mentioned someone named Caroline." The moment I said that name, Martha's face went completely white. She gripped the rail of David's bed so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at me, with tears instantly flooding her eyes. "How could he, ... she whispered. "How could he, possibly?" She couldn't finish her sentence. She sank into the chair beside his bed and began crying. Deep, shaking sobs that seemed to come from a place of profound pain. I gave her a few moments before gently asking, "Who is Caroline, Mrs. Fletcher?" Martha looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Caroline was our daughter," she said quietly. "She died when she was 6 years old, 42 years ago." I felt my heart clench. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. Martha shook her head. "You don't understand," she continued. "Caroline's death nearly destroyed our marriage. David was driving the car when the accident happened. It wasn't his fault. A drunk driver hit us, but David never forgave himself. He carried that guilt for over 4 decades." She paused, wiping her eyes. "About 5 years after Caroline died, I found out that David had been going to her grave every single week without telling me. He would go early in the morning before work, and he never mentioned it. When I discovered this, I felt betrayed. We had agreed to grieve together, to move forward together, but he had been suffering alone all that time. It caused a huge rift between us." Martha looked at her unconscious husband with such tenderness and sorrow. "We eventually worked through it, went to therapy, rebuilt our relationship. But we never really talked about Caroline anymore. It was too painful. David stopped visiting her grave, at least as far as I knew. We just moved on with our lives as best we could. She held David's hand tightly. For him to mention her name now, after all these years, while he's fighting for his life, it means he's still carrying that guilt. He's still sorry. He never let it go. Over the next 3 days, David's condition slowly improved. He was taken off the ventilator and regained consciousness. When he was finally able to speak clearly, Martha told him what I had heard him say while he was unconscious. David broke down in tears. He confessed that he had, in fact, continued to visit Caroline's grave in secret for all these years. Every Sunday morning, he would tell Martha he was going for a walk, but he would drive to the cemetery instead. The guilt of Caroline's death had never left him, and neither had his need to stay connected to her. Martha cried too, but not from anger. She cried because she finally understood the depth of David's pain he had hidden even from her for so many years. They held each other and talked for hours, finally having the conversation about Caroline that they should have had decades ago. David made a full recovery, against all medical odds. The doctors called it a miracle. But I believe something else happened that night. I believe that in his moment of crisis, when his heart was literally failing, David's deepest regret, his most profound sorrow, forced its way out. His heart, the organ that had carried the weight of his guilt for 42 years, finally spoke the truth he had been unable to say. Before David was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, both he and Martha came to thank me personally. They told me they had visited Caroline's grave together for the first time in decades. They made a promise to each other to visit her together every Sunday from then on, to finally grieve as a family, even after all these years. I never look at a heart monitor the same way now. Every beat, every rhythm, tells a story. And sometimes, in the most critical moments, the heart reveals truths that the conscious mind can't or won't express. That night taught me that our hearts hold more than blood. They hold our loves, our losses, our regrets, and our secrets. And sometimes, just sometimes, they find a way to speak.
My name is Thomas Brennan, and I work as a psychiatric nurse at a mental health facility in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for 16 years. Working in psychiatric nursing requires a different kind of strength than physical nursing. You're dealing with minds that are fractured, perceptions that are altered, and realities that don't match our own. But what happened with one particular patient made me question where the line between mental illness and genuine supernatural experience actually exists. It was September 2019 when a young woman named Amanda Collins, 29 years old, was admitted to our facility. She had been brought in by police after she was found wandering the streets at 3 a.m, screaming about shadows following her. She was diagnosed with acute psychosis, possibly triggered by severe stress and sleep deprivation. Amanda worked as an accountant and had apparently been working 18-hour days for weeks leading up to her breakdown. When I first met Amanda during my night shift, she seemed relatively calm. She was on medication to help manage her anxiety and hallucinations, but as the night progressed, her agitation grew. Around midnight, I went to check on her in her room. She was sitting on her bed, pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the corner of the room near the door. "What are you looking at, Amanda?" I asked gently. She didn't take her eyes off that corner. "Can't you see them?" she whispered. "They're right there. They're always there." I looked at the empty corner. "There's nothing there, Amanda. You're safe here." She finally looked at me, and the terror in her eyes was genuine and profound. "You can't see them because they don't want you to," she said. "But they're there. The shadow people. They've been following me for 3 months. Every night, they get closer. I sat down in the chair near her bed, maintaining a calm presence. Tell me about these shadow people. When did you first start seeing them? Amanda hugged her knees to her chest. It started the night I stayed late at the office working on a major audit. I was alone in the building, or at least I thought I was. Around 2 in the morning, I saw a shadow move across the wall of my office. At first, I thought it was my own shadow from my desk lamp, but then I realized the shadow was moving independently. It was shaped like a person, but completely black. No features, no details, just a human-shaped darkness. She paused, trembling. I convinced myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on my eyes. But then I saw it again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, it was closer. By the end of the first week, I could see multiple shadows. They would stand in corners, in doorways, always at the edge of my vision. But when I tried to look directly at them, they would move. I listened to her story with professional empathy, recognizing the classic signs of psychosis brought on by extreme stress and exhaustion. Shadow people hallucinations are actually quite common in such cases. Amanda, I said carefully, what you're experiencing is likely your mind's response to severe stress and lack of sleep. The shadows aren't real. They can't hurt you. We're going to help you get better. She shook her head violently. That's what everyone says. The police, the doctors, even my family. But I know what I'm seeing. They're real, and they're here right now. 3 of them. One in that corner, she pointed, one behind you, and one standing right next to your chair. I felt an involuntary chill run down my spine, even though I knew intellectually that there was nothing there. It's a testament to how convincing psychotic patients can be in their delusions. The human mind is incredibly powerful. For the next week, I worked closely with Amanda during my night shifts. Her psychiatrist adjusted her medications, and she began therapy sessions during the day. Gradually, she seemed to improve. She reported seeing fewer shadows, and they seemed less threatening when she did see them. Then, about 10 days into her stay, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was doing my rounds. When I approached Amanda's room, I noticed the temperature in the hallway had dropped noticeably. It was late September, and while the nights were getting cooler, the hospital's heating system should have kept everything at a consistent temperature. I entered Amanda's room and found her sitting up in bed, wide awake, staring at that same corner she always stared at. Before I could say anything, all the lights in her room flickered and then went out completely. Not just her room, but the entire hallway. Backup emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that red light, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. For just a brief moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, I saw a shadow in the corner of Amanda's room. Not a normal shadow cast by an object blocking light, but a shadow that existed independently. It was darker than the surrounding darkness, a human-shaped void that seemed to absorb even the dim emergency lighting around it. Then it was gone. The main lights flickered back on, and the corner was empty. Just a normal, well-lit corner of a hospital room. Amanda was looking at me with wide eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. "You finally saw one of them." I was shaken, but I tried to maintain my professional composure. The lights went out. The emergency lighting can create optical illusions. But even as I said it, I knew what I had seen was different. It wasn't a trick of light. It was an absence of light, a shape cut out of reality itself. Amanda wasn't convinced by my explanation, and honestly, neither was I. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed. I checked with maintenance about the power outage. They told me there had been no power interruption that night. All systems had functioned normally. Yet, I had experienced the lights going out. The emergency lighting had activated. Or had it? Was it possible that I had experienced some kind of shared hallucination with Amanda? Could her psychosis have been somehow contagious? affecting my own perception. I researched the phenomenon and found it's called folie à deux, or shared psychotic disorder, where delusional beliefs are transmitted from one person to another. But that typically requires prolonged, close contact and a specific type of relationship dynamic. 2 weeks after the shadow incident, Amanda was discharged from our facility. Her psychiatrist determined that her psychosis had been successfully managed with medication and therapy. She reported no longer seeing the shadow people, or at least she had learned to recognize them as hallucinations and not react to them. On her last day, Amanda asked to speak with me privately. When we were alone, she looked at me with complete clarity and sanity in her eyes. "They're still there," she said quietly. "I still see them, but I've learned to pretend I don't because that's what everyone needs me to say to believe I'm better." She paused. "But you saw one that night, Nurse Brennan. You saw what I see. So I need you to know something important. They're real. I don't know what they are or why they're here, but they're real. And the medication doesn't make them go away. It just makes it easier to ignore them." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she still needed help, that she should be honest with her doctors. But I couldn't, because part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, believed her. In the 3 years since Amanda was discharged, I've thought about her often. I've worked with dozens of other psychiatric patients who reported seeing shadow people, and I've treated each case, as I was trained to, as symptoms of mental illness requiring medical intervention. But late at night, when I'm walking the dimly lit hallways of the psychiatric ward, I sometimes catch movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that seem to move independently, shapes that disappear when I turn to look directly at them. I tell myself it's fatigue, stress, the power of suggestion. I remind myself that I'm a medical professional trained to distinguish between reality and delusion. But sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder if Amanda was right. I wonder if there are things in this world that exist in the spaces between light and dark, things that most of us never see, but some people, for reasons we don't understand, are forced to witness. And I wonder if that night in Amanda's room, the boundary between her reality and mine briefly dissolved, allowing me a glimpse into a world I was never meant to see.
My name is Linda Martinez, and I've been a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, for 19 years. Bringing new life into the world is the most beautiful part of my job. There's something miraculous about witnessing a birth, about seeing that first breath, hearing that first cry. But not all births end in joy. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite all of modern medicine's advances, we lose the baby, or the mother, or heartbreakingly, sometimes both. This is the story of a birth that defied everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what might exist between them. It was a warm night in May 2016 when Sarah Donnelly, a 32-year-old woman in her 38th week of pregnancy, was rushed into our labor and delivery unit. She had been in a severe car accident, T-boned by a pickup truck that ran a red light. Her husband had been driving and was killed instantly in the crash. Sarah had been airlifted to our hospital because we had the most advanced neonatal intensive care unit in the region. When Sarah arrived, she was unconscious and in critical condition. She had suffered massive internal injuries, including a ruptured spleen and severe head trauma. But miraculously, her uterus was intact, and the baby's heartbeat was still strong. The trauma team immediately went to work, trying to stabilize Sarah. But it was clear that her injuries were catastrophic. Dr. Patterson, the trauma surgeon, made a difficult decision. "We need to deliver this baby now," he said. "The mother isn't going to survive much longer, but we might be able to save the child." An emergency C-section was performed right there in the trauma bay. I was part of the team assisting with the delivery. As Dr. Patterson made the incision, Sarah, who had been completely unconscious since arriving, suddenly opened her eyes. Her hand shot up and grabbed Dr. Patterson's wrist with surprising strength. The entire team froze. Sarah's eyes were unfocused, almost glassy, but her grip was firm. Her lips moved, and a voice came out, but it wasn't quite her voice. It was deeper, strained, as if speaking required enormous effort. "Don't let her see," Sarah said. "Promise me. Don't let my baby see." Dr. Patterson looked shocked, but managed to respond. "See what, Sarah? Your baby is going to be fine. We're taking care of both of you." "No." Sarah's voice became more insistent, almost desperate. "Don't let her see me like this. Don't let her last memory of me be this way. Tell her I loved her. Tell her every day. Tell her about the good times. Don't let her know how it ended." Tears started streaming down Sarah's face, but her eyes remained unfocused, staring at something beyond all of us. Dr. Patterson gently removed her hand from his wrist. "Sarah, we're going to take care of your daughter, I promise." Sarah's eyes slowly closed, and she whispered one more thing. "Her name is Hope. We wanted to name her Hope." She took a shuddering breath, and then she was gone. The monitors flatlined with that horrible continuous tone that every medical professional knows means death. But we didn't have time to mourn. We had a baby to save. Dr. Patterson completed the C-section, and moments later, a beautiful baby girl was born. She cried immediately, a strong, healthy cry that filled the trauma room. Against all odds, despite the massive trauma her mother had suffered, despite the accident and the emergency surgery, this baby was perfect. We rushed her to the NICU for observation, but all her vital signs were strong. She was breathing on her own, her color was good, her APGAR scores were excellent. It was nothing short of miraculous. I stayed with baby Hope in the NICU while the trauma team worked on documenting Sarah's death and preparing to contact her family. As I sat there watching this tiny newborn, this little girl who would never know her father and had just lost her mother, I felt a profound sadness mixed with gratitude that at least we had saved her. Around 4 in the morning, Sarah's mother, Hope's grandmother, arrived at the hospital. Her name was Margaret Donnelly, and she was devastated. Her son-in-law was dead, her daughter was dead, but at least her granddaughter had survived. When Margaret saw Hope for the first time, she broke down in tears. "She looks just like Sarah did when she was born," she sobbed. "It's like seeing my daughter again." I left grandmother and granddaughter alone for a while to bond. When I returned to check on them an hour later, Margaret was holding Hope, rocking her gently and singing a soft lullaby. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Nurse Martinez," she said, "can I tell you something strange?" "Of course, Mrs. Donnelly." "About 6 months ago, Sarah had a vivid dream," Margaret began. "She woke up terrified and called me in the middle of the night. She told me she had dreamed that something terrible happened to her and John, that's her husband. In the dream, she saw herself in a hospital, but she wasn't alive anymore. She said she saw her baby being born, but she couldn't hold her. She couldn't comfort her." My heart started to pound. Margaret continued. "Sarah was sobbing on the phone, telling me this dream. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I would make sure her baby knew how much she was loved. She made me promise that I would tell the baby about the happy times, about how excited Sarah was to be a mother, about all the plans she had for their future together." She paused, tears streaming down her face again. "Sarah made me promise that I wouldn't let the baby's first association with her be death or tragedy. She wanted her daughter to know her as she was in life, full of hope and love and dreams." My hands started trembling. Mrs. Donnelly, I said carefully, did Sarah tell you what she wanted to name the baby? Margaret looked surprised. No, actually. Sarah and John wanted to keep the name a secret until the birth. They hadn't told anyone, not even me. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath. Because when your daughter was dying, in her last moments, she told us the baby's name. She said they wanted to name her Hope. Margaret's face went white. She looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at me. That's impossible, she whispered. Sarah was unconscious when she arrived, wasn't she? The accident was severe. How could she have told you anything? I explained what had happened in the trauma room. How Sarah had briefly regained consciousness just long enough to speak. How she had begged us not to let her daughter see her like that. How she had asked us to tell her baby about the good times. Exactly what she had made Margaret promise in that phone call 6 months earlier. Margaret was silent for a long time, just holding Hope and crying quietly. Finally, she spoke. My daughter knew, she said softly. Somehow, she knew this was going to happen. That dream wasn't just a dream, it was a premonition. And in those last moments, even as her body was dying, she...
My name is James Porter, and I've worked as a nurse in the geriatric unit of a hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for 17 years. Working with elderly patients, especially those with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, requires patience, compassion, and an understanding that the mind can take us to places both wonderful and terrifying as it begins to fail. But sometimes, what appears to be confusion or delusion might actually be something else entirely, something we can't quite explain. This story is about a patient who made me question everything I thought I knew about dementia and the nature of human consciousness. Her name was Rose Sullivan, and she was 94 years old when she was admitted to our long-term care unit in November 2018. She had advanced Alzheimer's disease and had reached the point where she could no longer care for herself at home. Her daughter, Karen, made the difficult decision to place her in our care. Rose was a delightful woman, despite her condition. She would often speak about her past with remarkable clarity, telling stories about her childhood in Ireland, her immigration to America in the 1950s, her marriage to her late husband Patrick. But like most Alzheimer's patients, she existed in a fractured timeline. Sometimes she thought she was a young woman again, sometimes she didn't recognize her own daughter. And sometimes she would talk to people who weren't there. This is common with dementia patients. The brain misfires, creating hallucinations, pulling up memories of deceased loved ones and making them seem present. As a nurse, I was trained to gently redirect these episodes, to comfort the patient without either confirming or denying their hallucinations. But Rose was different. Her conversations with invisible people weren't random or confused. They were specific, detailed, and consistent. Every evening around 7 o'clock, Rose would become very animated. She would look toward the empty chair beside her bed and start talking. "Hello, Patrick," she would say, smiling warmly. "I've been waiting for you. You're late tonight." Then she would pause, as if listening to a response, and laugh. "Oh, you know I can't stay mad at you. Come, sit with me. Tell me about your day." For the first few weeks, I treated this like any other dementia-related hallucination. I would check on Rose during these episodes, make sure she was comfortable and not distressed, and let her have her conversations. Her daughter Karen was heartbroken by it. "Mom thinks Dad is still alive," she told me one evening, tears in her eyes. "Dad died 12 years ago. It's so hard to see her talking to him like he's really there." I offered the usual comfort. "It's very common, Mrs. Sullivan. In a way, it brings her peace. She's revisiting happy memories. Try not to let it upset you." But then something happened that made me reconsider everything. It was a cold evening in January, about 2 months after Rose had been admitted. I was working the night shift. And around 7 o'clock, I went to check on Rose for her evening medications. As expected, she was having her conversation with Patrick, but this time, what she said made me stop in my tracks. "Patrick, you need to tell Karen about the box," Rose said with unusual urgency. "The box in the attic, behind the Christmas decorations. She needs to find it before they sell the house. It's important. Tell her tonight." She paused, as if listening. Yes, I know you're not really here in that way, but she needs to know. Promise me you'll find a way to tell her." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was different from her usual pleasant conversations. This was specific, urgent, and spoke to awareness that her husband wasn't physically present. I decided to mention it to Karen the next day when she came to visit. "Mrs. Sullivan," I began carefully, "your mother said something interesting last night. She mentioned a box in your attic behind the Christmas decorations. Does that mean anything to you?" Karen looked puzzled. "A box in the attic."
My name is Catherine Walsh, and I've been a hospice nurse in Portland, Oregon, for 21 years. Hospice nursing is unlike any other type of nursing. We're not trying to cure anyone or extend life at any cost. We're providing comfort, dignity, and peace to people in their final days, weeks, or months. We're helping people die well, if such a thing is possible. And in doing this work, I've witnessed things that have convinced me that death is not an ending, but a transition to something else. This story is about a patient who showed me that the dying can sometimes see beyond the veil that separates this world from whatever comes next. His name was Father Michael O'Brien, an 86-year-old Catholic priest who had terminal lung cancer. He had spent 60 years serving his parish, baptizing babies, performing marriages, counseling the troubled, and administering last rites to the dying. Now, it was his turn to receive those final sacraments, to make his own journey toward whatever awaited him. Father Michael was admitted to our hospice care facility in August 2020. He was weak, his breathing labored, but his mind remained sharp and his faith unshaken. From our very first conversation, I could tell he was different from most patients. He had no fear of death whatsoever. In fact, he seemed almost eager for it. "I've been preparing for this my whole life, Catherine," he told me with a gentle smile. "I've walked with so many people to the threshold of eternity. Now I finally get to cross it myself. I'm curious, I'll admit. Curious and excited to see if everything I've believed and taught is true." Over the weeks I cared for him, Father Michael and I had many deep conversations about life, death, faith, and what might come after. He told me stories about his decades of ministry, about the people he'd helped, the doubts he'd struggled with, and the moments of grace that had sustained his faith through difficult times. But it was in his final week that something extraordinary began to happen. It started on a Tuesday evening. I came into his room to check his vitals and administer his pain medication. Father Michael was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner of the room near the window with an expression of wonder on his face. "Father, are you all right?" I asked. He didn't look at me, just kept staring at that corner. "Do you see them, Catherine?" he asked quietly. "See what, Father?" "The angels," he said simply. "There are 3 of them. They've been coming and going for the past hour. They're beautiful, not like the paintings in churches. More like ... beings of pure light and purpose. They don't speak with words, but I can understand them nonetheless." I gently touched his shoulder. "Father Michael, you're on a lot of pain medication. Sometimes it can cause hallucinations." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were completely clear and lucid. "I know what hallucinations feel like, Catherine. I've been on these medications for weeks now. This is different, they're real, and they're waiting for me. Not taking me yet, just waiting. Preparing the way, perhaps. I checked his chart. His vitals were declining steadily. Based on my experience, I estimated he had perhaps 3 to 5 days left. Father Michael seemed to sense my thoughts. "Not much longer now," he said peacefully. "And I'm ready. That's what the angels are here to confirm. I'm ready, and they're ready to guide me home." Over the next 3 days, Father Michael's condition continued to deteriorate, but something strange was happening. Multiple staff members, including myself, began experiencing unusual phenomena in and around his room. The temperature would fluctuate dramatically without any logical reason. We would hear what sounded like soft music or singing, but could never identify a source. The light in his room would sometimes seem brighter, more golden, than the fluorescent hospital lighting should produce. And more than once, I and other nurses reported feeling a presence in the room, a sense of being watched by something benevolent and peaceful. Father Michael, meanwhile, continued to report seeing the angels. He would have conversations with them, or rather, he would speak his thoughts aloud, and then sit in silence, as if listening to responses we could unhear. On Thursday evening, 2 days before he died, something happened that shook me to my core. I was sitting with Father Michael during the night shift. His breathing had become very labored, and I didn't want him to be alone. Around 2 in the morning, he suddenly became very agitated. "Catherine," he said urgently, "you need to call my brother. Call Patrick right now. It's important." I was confused. Father Michael's brother Patrick lived in Boston. It was 5 in the morning there, and Father Michael's condition, while serious, wasn't immediately critical. "Father, it's the middle of the night in Boston. Why don't we wait until morning?" "No," Father Michael insisted with surprising strength. "Call him now. He's in trouble. He needs to hear my voice. Please, Catherine." Something in his urgency made me agree. I called the number for Patrick O'Brien that was listed in Father Michael's contact information. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello. Mr. O'Brien, this is Catherine Walsh. I'm a hospice nurse, caring for your brother Michael. He's asking to speak with you. Is everything okay?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Patrick's voice came back, but it sounded strange, strained. How did he know? He whispered, "Know what, Mr. O'Brien?" "I was sitting in my bathroom 20 minutes ago with a bottle of pills," Patrick said, his voice breaking. "I've been severely depressed for months. Lost my job, my wife left me, I'm about to lose my house. Tonight, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was going to end it, but I couldn't quite make myself do it. I've been sitting here trying to find the courage or the reason not to. And now my brother calls." My heart stopped. I quickly handed the phone to Father Michael. "Patrick," Father Michael's voice was weak but filled with love. "I'm so glad I reached you. Listen to me, little brother. I know you're in pain. I know life feels impossible right now, but you can't give up. Do you hear me? You cannot give up." Father Michael paused, breathing heavily from the effort of speaking. "The angels told me you were in danger. They woke me and told me to reach."
My name is Daniel Reeves, and I work as a trauma nurse in the emergency department of a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, for 13 years. The ER is chaos incarnate. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, heart attacks, strokes, you name it. We see the worst moments of people's lives, and we do everything in our power to pull them back from the brink. You develop a thick skin working in trauma. You have to, or the job will destroy you. But every once in a while something happens that breaks through that professional detachment and reminds you that you're dealing with human souls, not just bodies. This is the story of one such case. A case that made me believe in things I never thought possible. It was a Friday night in July 2021, around 11:30, We'd already had a busy evening, multiple car accidents from people driving recklessly, a few assault cases, the usual weekend chaos. Then the paramedics rushed in with a 19-year-old kid named Marcus Jenkins. He'd been shot 3 times during an attempted robbery at a convenience store where he worked. 1 bullet had grazed his head, 1 had gone through his shoulder, and the 3rd had entered his chest, dangerously close to his heart. He was in bad shape, unconscious, losing blood fast. We rushed him into Trauma Bay 1, and the team went to work immediately. Dr. Singh, our trauma surgeon, was calling out orders. I need 2 large-bore IVs. Get me 4 units of O-negative blood. Someone page cardiothoracic. We might need surgery. I was managing the airway, making sure Marcus kept breathing while Dr. Singh worked to control the bleeding. The kid's vitals were dropping fast. Blood pressure 70/40 and falling. Heart rate 140 and climbing. He was crashing right in front of us. Despite our best efforts, Marcus coded. His heart stopped. "Damn it, start compressions," Dr. Singh shouted. I immediately began chest compressions while another nurse prepared the defibrillator. We worked on him for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes. "Clear," Dr. Singh called out, and we shocked Marcus's heart. Nothing. The monitor showed a flat line. We shocked him again and again. On the 4th shock, we got a rhythm back, weak and irregular, but it was something. His heart was beating again. But Marcus didn't wake up. His brain had been deprived of oxygen during the time his heart was stopped. We got him stabilized enough to move him up to the ICU, but his prognosis wasn't good. Even if he survived, there was a high likelihood of severe brain damage. His mother arrived at the hospital around 1 in the morning. Her name was Gloria Jenkins, and the anguish on her face was heartbreaking. She was a single mother, worked 2 jobs to support Marcus and his younger sister. Marcus had been working at that convenience store to help with family expenses while attending community college. Dr. Singh explained Marcus's condition to Gloria as gently as possible. "Your son is alive, but he's in critical condition. The next 24 to 48 hours will tell us a lot. We need to see if his brain function returns." Gloria collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "He's all I have," she kept saying. "He's such a good boy. He didn't deserve this." I sat with Gloria for a...
My name is Sofia Martinez, and I've worked as a pediatric intensive care nurse at a children's hospital in San Diego, California, for 11 years. Working with critically ill children is emotionally devastating. These are babies, toddlers, young kids who should be playing and laughing and living, but instead, they're fighting for their lives in hospital beds. It takes a special kind of person to do this job, and even then, you still go home some nights and cry yourself to sleep. But despite the heartbreak, there are moments of profound beauty and hope. Moments that remind you why you chose this career. This is the story of one such moment. A moment that convinced me there are forces in this universe that look out for innocent souls. It was December 2019, just a few weeks before the world would change with the pandemic. A 4-year-old girl named Emma Richardson was admitted to our PICU. She had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of leukemia 6 months earlier. The treatment had been brutal, rounds of chemotherapy that made her tiny body so sick, so weak, but the cancer kept coming back. Her parents, David and Rachel Richardson, were exhausted and heartbroken. They had spent the last 6 months watching their vibrant, joyful daughter slowly fade away. Now the doctors had given them the devastating news that there was nothing more they could do. Emma's cancer had spread throughout her body. She had maybe a few days left, a week at most. When I first met Emma, she was awake, but very weak. She had lost all her hair from the chemotherapy. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. But despite everything, when she looked at me, she smiled. "Hi," she said in a small voice. "Are you my new nurse?" "I am," I told her, fighting back tears. My name is Sophia. What's yours? I'm Emma. I'm 4 years old. I like princesses and unicorns. Do you like unicorns? I love unicorns, I said, sitting down beside her bed. Emma, despite her condition, despite the pain she must have been in, spent the next 10 minutes telling me elaborate stories about a magical unicorn kingdom she had created in her imagination. She described the unicorns' names, their colors, their personalities. She told me about the castle made of rainbow crystals and the princess who ruled over the kingdom with kindness and magic. Her parents watched from the corner of the room, tears streaming down their faces. They had heard these stories so many times over the past months. It was Emma's escape, her way of coping with the hospital stays and the treatments and the pain. Over the next few days, I spent as much time with Emma as my duties allowed. I would sit with her, listening to her stories, reading her books about princesses and unicorns, trying to make her comfortable as her little body grew weaker. Emma's parents barely left her side. They took turns sleeping in the chair beside her bed, always making sure one of them was awake and with her. They would sing to her, read to her, hold her hand, tell her how much they loved her. On the 4th day after Emma was admitted, something beautiful and inexplicable happened. It was around 4 in the afternoon. I was in Emma's room, adjusting her for medications to manage her pain. Emma's mother Rachel was sitting beside the bed, gently stroking Emma's hair. Emma had been asleep for most of the day, her breathing shallow and labored. Suddenly, Emma opened her eyes. But they weren't the tired, pain-filled eyes I had seen for days. They were bright, clear, full of wonder. "Mommy," Emma said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Look at all the unicorns." Rachel looked around the room, confused. "Sweetie, there are no unicorns here. We're in the hospital, remember?" Emma smiled, the most radiant smile. "Yes, there are, Mommy. Can't you see them? They're everywhere. There's a pink one right next to you, and a purple one at the foot of my bed. And look, there's a golden one by the window." She pointed around the room, her eyes following something we couldn't see. Rachel looked at me with tears in her eyes. "It's the medication," I said gently. "Sometimes it can cause hallucinations." But even as I said it, something felt different. Emma wasn't acting confused or distressed the way patients usually do when experiencing medication-induced hallucinations. She was joyful, peaceful, more present and alive than she had been in days. "The unicorns are so pretty," Emma continued. "They're telling me something. They're saying I don't have to hurt anymore. They're saying I'm going to their kingdom, the real kingdom, not the pretend one in my stories. The real one where everything is beautiful and nothing hurts." Rachel was sobbing now. "Emma, honey, I don't want you to go to any kingdom. I want you to stay here with Mommy and Daddy." Emma looked at her mother with such love and wisdom in her 4-year-old eyes. "But Mommy, I'm so tired, and I hurt so much. The unicorns are saying I can rest in their kingdom, and I can visit you in your dreams. I'll still be with you, just in a different way." David had been outside the room making a phone call. Rachel quickly texted him to come back immediately. When he entered the room, Emma's face lit up. "Daddy, the unicorns are here. Aren't they beautiful?" David looked at me, confused and heartbroken. Then he went to Emma's bedside and took her tiny hand in his. "Tell me about the unicorns, baby girl," he said, his voice breaking. Emma spent the next 20 minutes describing in vivid detail the unicorns she was seeing. She talked about their colors, their sparkles, the way they moved. She said they were dancing around the room, filling it with light and music. She said they were singing her favorite songs. And then Emma said something that made everyone in the room freeze. "Grandma Betty is here too," Emma said. "She's riding the golden unicorn. She's so pretty, Daddy. She says she's been waiting for me. She says she's going to take me to see Grandpa George too." David looked like he'd been struck. Emma's grandmother, Betty Richardson, had died 2 years before Emma was born. Emma had seen pictures of her and heard stories, but had never met her in life. And Emma's grandfather, George Richardson, had died when David was a teenager, decades before Emma existed. "Grandma Betty says she's sorry she didn't get to meet me when I was born," Emma continued. "But she's been watching me my whole life. She was there at all my birthdays. She was there when I took my first steps. She's always been there, just invisible. And now I get to finally meet her properly." By this point, every adult in the room was crying. Emma's nurse supervisor had joined us, and even she, a hardened PICU veteran of 30 years, had tears streaming down her face. Emma's energy began to fade. Her eyes started to close. She looked so peaceful, so content. "I'm going to go with the unicorns now," she said sleepily. "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy. Don't be too sad. I'll be happy in the unicorn kingdom, and I'll visit you in dreams. I promise." Her parents climbed onto the bed with her, holding her between them, both of them telling her how much they loved her, how proud they were of her, how brave she had been. Around 5:15 in the afternoon, Emma Richardson took her last breath. She died peacefully, cradled in her parents' arms. And at the exact moment she died, something inexplicable happened. The hospital room, which had been filled with the harsh fluorescent lighting typical of medical facilities, suddenly seemed to glow with a softer, more golden light. It lasted only a few seconds, but everyone present saw it. The 4 adults in that room, all of us witnessed the same phenomenon. The air in the room felt different too. Warmer, lighter, almost buoyant. And for just a brief moment, I could swear I heard music, delicate and ethereal, like wind chimes or bells ringing in the distance. Then everything returned to normal. The regular hospital lighting, the usual sounds of the PICU, the heartbreaking reality that a 4-year-old girl had just died. I helped David and Rachel through the immediate aftermath. The paperwork, the phone calls to family, the funeral home arrangements. Through it all, they kept coming back to Emma's final hour, to her visions of unicorns and her grandmother. That night, after my shift ended, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried for an hour. I cried for Emma, for her parents, for all the children I'd cared for who didn't get to grow up. But I also cried with a
My name is Robert Chen, and I work as a neurological ICU nurse in a hospital in San Francisco, California for 14 years. The Neuro ICU is where we care for patients with traumatic brain injuries, strokes, aneurysms, and other severe neurological conditions. It's challenging work because the brain is still such a mystery to us. We've mapped it, studied it, developed incredible interventions. But we still don't fully understand consciousness, memory, personality, all the things that make a person who they are. This story is about a patient who challenged everything I thought I knew about brain function, consciousness, and the relationship between our physical bodies and whatever you want to call it, the soul, the spirit, the essence of who we are. It began on a rainy evening in March 2018. A 54-year-old woman named Dr. Karen Westbrook was brought into our unit. She was a neurosurgeon herself, ironically, who had suffered a massive stroke while performing surgery. Her colleagues had noticed her suddenly becoming confused mid-procedure. She had tried to continue operating but was clearly disoriented. Within minutes, she collapsed. By the time she arrived at our hospital, the stroke had caused severe damage to large portions of her brain. The scans were devastating. Dr. Westbrook had lost function in areas responsible for speech, motor control, and higher cognitive processes. The neurologist treating her, Dr. Ahmed, was grim when he discussed her prognosis with her husband, Tom. "The damage is extensive," Dr. Ahmed explained. "Even if she survives, the likelihood of meaningful recovery is very low. She'll probably remain in a vegetative or minimally conscious state." Tom Westbrook was a quiet man, a high school English teacher who clearly adored his wife. He refused to give up hope. "Karen is the strongest person I know," he said. "She's fought through everything in her life. She'll fight through this, too." Over the first week, Dr. Westbrook remained in a coma. We provided supportive care, managing her vitals, preventing complications, waiting to see if her brain would show any signs of recovery. Tom spent every day at her bedside, reading to her, playing her favorite music, talking to her about their life together. It was heartbreaking to watch. On the 8th day, something unexpected happened. Dr. Westbrook's eyes opened. She was awake, but she showed no signs of awareness. Her eyes would track movement occasionally, but without any apparent understanding or recognition. She met the clinical criteria for a vegetative state. Tom was devastated but refused to give up. "Even if she can't respond, I know she's in there somewhere," he insisted. "I'm going to keep talking to her, keep connecting with her, until she finds her way back." What happened over the next 3 weeks was one of the most remarkable things I've ever witnessed in my nursing career. Tom established a routine. Every day, he would arrive at 9 in the morning. He would greet Karen, tell her he loved her, and then he would teach. He would stand beside her bed with a whiteboard and give English literature lectures as if she were his student. He would discuss Shakespeare, poetry, novels, themes, character development, literary devices. He would write on the whiteboard, read passages aloud, ask rhetorical questions, everything he did in his actual classroom. The first few days, it seemed futile. Dr. Westbrook showed no response whatsoever. But Tom persisted. On the 4th day of his teaching, something small happened. Tom was discussing Romeo and Juliet, specifically the balcony scene. He recited the famous lines, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." When he finished the quote, Dr. Westbrook's right index finger twitched, just once, barely noticeable, but Tom saw it. "Did you see that?" he asked excitedly. She moved her finger. I checked the monitors. There was a small spike in her brain activity, brief but definite. "It could be a reflex," I cautioned, "but it's also possible she's responding to your voice. Keep talking to her." Tom was energized. Over the next week, he intensified his efforts. He brought in books from their home library, books they had read together, favorite novels and poems. He would read passages and watch for any response. Gradually, impossibly, Dr. Westbrook began showing more signs of awareness. Her finger twitches became more frequent and seemed to correlate with specific content in Tom's readings. Her eyes would track his movements more consistently. Once, when Tom read a particularly funny passage from a P.G. Wodehouse novel, the corner of her mouth twitched upward, almost like the beginning of a smile. Dr. Ahmed was cautiously optimistic, but skeptical. "These could still be random reflexes," he told Tom. "I don't want you to get your hopes up too high." But Tom wasn't listening to caution. He knew his wife. He insisted something more was happening. 3 weeks after Dr. Westbrook woke from her coma, Tom had an idea. He came to me during my shift and asked for a favor. "Robert," he said, "I want to try something. Karen spent her entire career as a neurosurgeon. She lived and breathed neuroscience. What if instead of just reading literature to her, I read from her neurosurgery textbooks? What if I described surgical procedures, brain anatomy, cases she worked on? Do you think it might reach her in a way that other content hasn't?" I thought about it. Different areas of the brain store different types of information and expertise. Literature and poetry might activate certain neural pathways, but professional knowledge, especially something as deeply ingrained as Dr. Westbrook's surgical expertise, might activate different, possibly less damaged pathways. It was worth a try. Tom brought in Dr. Westbrook's medical textbooks and journals. He started reading to her about brain anatomy, surgical techniques, case studies. He would describe complex procedures, draw diagrams on the whiteboard showing surgical approaches to various brain conditions. The response was almost immediate and dramatic. As Tom read about a particularly complex aneurysm repair technique, Dr. Westbrook's eyes suddenly focused, really focused, with intention and awareness. Her right hand, which had been motionless, suddenly moved. She seemed to be trying to gesture, to demonstrate something. "Tom, look at her hand," I said urgently. "She's trying to show you something." Tom watched his wife's hand carefully. "Karen, are you trying to show me the surgical approach?" Her finger made a definite movement, up and down. A nod translated to her finger because she couldn't move her head. Tom started crying. He grabbed her hand. "You're in there. I knew it. You're still in there." Over the next several days, Tom developed a communication system with Dr. Westbrook. 1 finger movement for yes, 2 for no. It was crude but functional. Tom would ask her questions and she would respond. Slowly, painstakingly, Dr. Westbrook began communicating. Dr. Ahmed was astounded. "This shouldn't be possible," he kept saying. "The areas of her brain responsible for language and motor control are severely damaged. Yet somehow she's finding alternate neural pathways to communicate. It's extraordinary, but the most remarkable moment came about 5 weeks after Dr. Westbrook's stroke. Tom was reading to her from one of her surgical journals, a case study about a patient with a brain tumor. As he read, Dr. Westbrook became agitated. Her heart rate increased. She was trying desperately to move, to communicate something. Tom noticed immediately. "Karen, what is it? What are you trying to tell me?" Dr. Westbrook's eyes moved deliberately to the whiteboard on the other side of the room, then back to Tom. Tom understood. "You want me to bring you the whiteboard?" 1 finger movement. "Yes." Tom brought the whiteboard closer. He put the marker in Dr. Westbrook's right hand, a hand that had regained some limited movement. Her grip was weak and her control was poor, but she slowly, laboriously, began to move the marker across the board. It took her almost 10 minutes. Her hand shook with the effort. The marks were barely legible, more like scratches than letters. But gradually a word emerged. "Wrong." Tom stared at the whiteboard. "Wrong? What's wrong, Karen?" Dr. Westbrook's eyes moved back to the journal article Tom had been reading. She made more marks on the whiteboard. "Diagnose." Tom's eyes widened. The diagnosis in this article is wrong." 1 finger movement. Yes, Dr. Westbrook, with tremendous effort, made a few more scratchy marks. "Tumor." Then more marks. "Aneurysm." Tom looked at me, stunned. "She's saying the patient didn't have a tumor, they had an aneurysm. The diagnosis in this published case study is wrong." I was skeptical. The article was in a peer-reviewed medical journal written by respected neurosurgeons. How could the diagnosis...
My name is Angela Morrison, and I've been working as a burn unit nurse at a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, for 16 years. The burn unit is one of the most difficult places to work in any hospital. The injuries are catastrophic, the pain is unimaginable, and the recovery process is long and agonizing. Patients come to us from house fires, car accidents, industrial explosions, and other tragedies. We see people at their absolute lowest, when their bodies have been destroyed and they're fighting just to survive. But sometimes, in the midst of all that suffering, you witness something that restores your faith in the human spirit and makes you believe in miracles. This is one of those stories. It was August 2017, the height of summer in Phoenix, when temperatures regularly exceeded 115 degrees. A family of 4 had been involved in a horrific car accident on Interstate 10. Their vehicle had been rear-ended by a semi-truck, causing them to spin out and collide with a barrier. The impact ruptured their gas tank, and the car burst into flames. The father, 42-year-old Michael Torres, had managed to pull his wife and 2 children from the burning vehicle before it exploded. In doing so, he sustained burns over 70% of his body. His wife Maria had burns over 40%. Their 10-year-old son, Diego, had minor burns on his arms and legs. Their 6-year-old daughter, Sofia, had somehow emerged with only smoke inhalation and minor cuts. Michael was the most critical. When he arrived at our burn unit, I honestly didn't think he would survive the night. Burns, covering 70% of the body, are almost always fatal. The pain is indescribable, the risk of infection is enormous, and the body's systems start shutting down from the trauma. But Michael Torres was a fighter. Against all odds, he survived that first night. Then the next night. Then the next. Maria was in our unit as well, but her burns, while serious, were less extensive. She was conscious and aware, which in some ways made it worse because she knew how critical her husband's condition was. Diego and Sofia had been treated and released to stay with their grandmother. For the first week, Michael remained heavily sedated. The pain of his injuries was too severe to allow him to be fully conscious. We performed multiple surgeries, removing dead tissue, trying to prevent infection, preparing for the skin grafts he would eventually need. Every day was a battle for his life. Maria, despite her own painful injuries, insisted on being wheeled to Michael's room every day. She couldn't touch him because of the infection risk and his fragile condition, but she would sit beside his bed and talk to him. She would tell him about Diego and Sofia, about how brave they were being, about how they needed him to fight, to come back to them. On the 8th day, something remarkable happened. Michael began to stabilize. His vitals improved. The infection we'd been fighting seemed to be responding to treatment. Dr. Patterson, the burn unit director, was cautiously optimistic. "He's got a fighter's spirit," Dr. Patterson said. "But he's got a long road ahead. We're talking months of surgeries, years of recovery." We began reducing Michael's sedation, allowing him to become more conscious. This is always a difficult transition in burn care because the patient becomes fully aware of their pain. We manage it as best we can with medications, but there's no escaping the agony of severe burns. When Michael first became fully conscious, the look in his eyes was haunting. The physical pain was evident, but there was also deep psychological anguish. He had seen himself in the mirror-like surfaces of medical equipment. He knew how badly he was burned. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the accident, I was in Michael's room, changing his dressings, a process that was excruciating for him despite the pain medication. Maria was in her wheelchair beside his bed, holding his hand through the protective glove she had to wear. Michael looked at Maria with tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the damage to his throat and lungs. "This is all my fault. We should have left earlier. I should have been paying more attention. I should have seen that truck coming." Maria squeezed his hand gently. "Mi amor, this was not your fault. You saved us. You pulled us out of that car. You saved our children. You're a hero." Michael shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Look at me. I'm a monster. The kids are going to be terrified of me. You're going to have to take care of me for the rest of my life. I should have just let the fire take me. Maybe everyone would be better off. I'm not going to be able to work, to provide for the family. I'm just going to be a burden." Maria started crying. "Don't you dare say that, Michael Torres. Don't you dare. Our children need their father. I need my husband. We don't care what you look like. We care that you're alive, that you're here, that you're fighting. You think Diego and Sofia care about scars. They just want their daddy back." Over the next few weeks, I watched Michael struggle, not just with his physical injuries, but with deep depression. This is common in burn patients. The change to their physical appearance, the loss of abilities, the chronic pain, it all takes a tremendous psychological toll. Our unit had a psychologist who worked with Michael, but he remained despondent. The turning point came about a month after the accident. Diego and Sofia were finally allowed to visit their father. Maria had been preparing them, showing them pictures so they wouldn't be shocked by their father's appearance. But nothing can truly prepare children for seeing a parent so badly injured. When Diego and Sofia entered Michael's room, there was a moment of hesitation. Michael's face was heavily bandaged, his body wrapped in dressings, tubes, and monitors everywhere. He looked very different from the father they remembered. Michael saw the hesitation, and his face crumpled. He turned his head away. "I told you," he said to Maria. "They're scared of me. I'm a monster to my own kids." But then, something beautiful happened. 6-year-old Sofia walked up to her father's bed. She looked at him carefully, studying his bandaged face. "Daddy," she said in her small voice, "you look like a superhero." Michael turned back to look at his daughter, confused. "What?" Sofia nodded seriously. "Yeah, superheroes always get hurt saving people. That's how you know they're real heroes. And you saved us, Daddy. You saved me, and Diego, and Mommy. So that makes you a superhero. And superheroes always have scars. That's like their badge." Diego, who had been hanging back, suddenly rushed forward. "Sofia's right, Dad. You're like Iron Man after he fights the bad guys. He gets all beat up, but he always comes back. You're going to come back too, right?" Michael started crying, deep sobs that shook his damaged body. I pulled Maria aside. "We need to be careful. Strong emotions can affect his breathing and heart rate." But Maria shook her head. "No. This is what he needs. This is his reason to fight." Over the next hour, Diego and Sofia sat with their father. Sofia told him about school, about her friends, about a picture she had drawn of their family where she had given her daddy a superhero cape. Diego talked about his soccer games, about how he was going to teach his dad to play again once he got better. Before they left, Sofia very gently kissed her father's bandaged forehead. "I love you, Daddy. Get better soon, okay? We need you to come home." From that day forward, Michael's entire attitude changed. He engaged with his physical therapy, even though it was agonizing. He worked with the psychologist on coping strategies. He focused on small goals, being able to move his fingers more, being able to sit up, being able to eventually stand. The months that followed were brutal. Michael endured more than 20 surgeries, skin grafts, reconstructive procedures, treatments for the complications that...
My name is David Okonkwo, and I've worked as a transplant nurse at a hospital in Houston, Texas, for 12 years. Transplant nursing is unique because we exist at the intersection of profound loss and miraculous hope. For someone to receive a life-saving organ transplant, someone else usually has to die. It's a bittersweet reality that we deal with every day. We witness families saying goodbye to their loved ones while simultaneously preparing to give another family the gift of continued life. This story is about a transplant case that showed me something extraordinary about the connections between human beings. about how a part of one person can carry their essence, their spirit, into another person's life in ways that medical science can't fully explain. It was February 2019 when 17-year-old Melissa Chang was brought to our hospital. She had been in a catastrophic car accident, hit by a drunk driver while walking home from her after-school job. Despite the trauma team's best efforts, Melissa's brain injuries were too severe. She was declared brain dead, kept alive only by machines. Melissa's parents, Robert and Susan Chang, were devastated. Their only child, a bright, talented young woman who had just been accepted to MIT, was gone. But in their grief, they made an incredibly generous decision. They agreed to donate Melissa's organs. Melissa had indicated on her driver's license that she wanted to be an organ donor. Robert told me that Melissa had always been someone who wanted to help others. If she can't live, Robert said through his tears, at least part of her can help others live. That's what she would have wanted. Melissa was a perfect match for multiple recipients on the transplant waiting list. Her heart would go to a 48-year-old man in Dallas who had been waiting for 2 years. Her kidneys would go to 2 different patients, one in Houston, one in New Orleans. Her liver would save a 19-year-old woman who had been battling liver disease since childhood. And her lungs would go to a 35-year-old woman here in Houston, a woman named Jennifer Martinez, who had cystic fibrosis and had been on the transplant list for 18 months. I was part of the team coordinating Jennifer's lung transplant. Jennifer had been on our transplant floor for 6 weeks, her condition deteriorating rapidly. Without new lungs, she had maybe another week or 2 to live. She had a husband, Carlos, and a 3-year-old daughter, Emma. When we told Jennifer that we had found a match, that she was going to receive new lungs that very night, she broke down crying. "I'm going to live," she kept saying. "I'm actually going to live. I'm going to see Emma grow up." The transplant surgery was performed overnight and was successful. Jennifer received Melissa's lungs, and they began functioning immediately. It was, by all medical measures, a perfect transplant. Over the next few days, as Jennifer recovered in the ICU, she progressed remarkably well. Her breathing improved dramatically. Her oxygen levels were better than they had been in years. Dr. Ramos, the transplant surgeon, was thrilled. "This is one of the smoothest post-transplant recoveries I've seen," he told Jennifer and Carlos. "Your body is accepting the new lungs beautifully." But about a week after the transplant, Jennifer started telling us about strange experiences she was having. At first, I attributed them to the medications, the stress of surgery, the psychological adjustment to having someone else's organs in your body. But as time went on, what Jennifer described became harder to dismiss. It started with dreams. Jennifer told me that she was having vivid dreams about a young Asian woman with long black hair. In the dreams, the woman was studying mathematics, working on complex equations that Jennifer didn't understand. The woman was sitting in what looked like a high school classroom, and there was a name written on a textbook, Melissa Chang. Jennifer had not been told any details about her donor, that standard protocol. Donor families and recipients are kept anonymous unless both parties agree to meet, and that usually doesn't happen until at least a year after the transplant. So there was no way Jennifer could have known her donor's name or what she looked like. "I must have heard the name somewhere," Jennifer said when I asked her about it. "Maybe one of the nurses mentioned it, and my subconscious picked up on it. But I checked. None of the staff had mentioned the donor's name in Jennifer's presence, and we certainly hadn't shown her any pictures." Then Jennifer started experiencing other unusual phenomena. She developed a craving for specific foods that she had never liked before. Particularly, she suddenly loved Vietnamese food, which she had always found too spicy and had avoided. She started listening to classical music, specifically piano compositions, which had never interested her before. She found herself thinking about mathematics, about numbers and equations, subjects that had never appealed to her. One day, about 3 weeks after the transplant, Carlos brought their daughter Emma to visit. 3-year-old Emma climbed onto her mother's hospital bed, thrilled to have her mommy feeling better. Jennifer hugged her daughter and then did something that surprised everyone in the room. She started singing a lullaby in what sounded like Mandarin Chinese. Jennifer didn't speak Mandarin. She had grown up in a Spanish-speaking household in Houston. She spoke English and Spanish, but no Asian languages. Carlos looked shocked. "Honey, what are you doing? Where did that song come from?" Jennifer looked equally shocked. "I don't know," she said. "I don't even know what language that was. It just came out." The melody popped into my head, and I started singing it. Do I know Chinese? That incident disturbed me enough that I decided to do some research.
My name is Michelle Anderson, and I've been working as a hospice nurse in rural Montana for 18 years. Hospice care in rural areas is different from hospice in cities. Often, patients choose to die at home, in the houses where they lived their entire lives, surrounded by the land they worked and the mountains they loved. As a hospice nurse, I drive hundreds of miles each week, visiting patients in remote ranches and farms, providing care and comfort in their final days. It's lonely work sometimes, but it's also sacred. I'm privileged to be present during one of the most important transitions a human being experiences, the passage from life to death. This story is about my very first hospice patient, a man who taught me everything I needed to know about this work, about dignity, about death, and about the mysterious connections that exist between humans and the natural world. His name was Thomas Red Bear, a 17-9-year-old Native American man, a member of the Blackfeet Nation, who had terminal pancreatic cancer. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of the reservation, about 40 miles from the nearest town. It was November 2006, and I was fresh out of nursing school, newly hired by the only hospice agency serving our region. Thomas was assigned as my first solo patient. I was nervous when I drove out to meet him that first cold November morning. The road to his house was unpaved, winding through grasslands with the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. His home was modest, a small wooden structure with smoke rising from a chimney. When Thomas opened the door, I was immediately struck by his presence. Despite his illness, despite the weight he'd obviously lost, and the yellowing of his skin from liver failure, he carried himself with dignity and calm. He looked at me with dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through my nervousness to the uncertainty underneath. "You're young," he said simply. "First patient." I nodded, embarrassed. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled gently. "You have the look of someone carrying a heavy responsibility they're not sure they're ready for. Come in. I'll make tea." Over the next hour, Thomas and I talked. He asked me about my training, my background, why I had chosen hospice nursing. I told him the truth, that I wanted to help people die with dignity, that I believed the end of life deserved as much attention and care as the beginning. Thomas listened carefully, then nodded. "Good answer. Most people are terrified of death. They avoid it, deny it, fight it, even when fighting only brings more suffering. But death is as natural as birth. It's just another transition. My people have always understood this." He paused, sipping his tea. "I'm not afraid of dying, Michelle. I've lived a good, long life. I've seen my children grow, held my grandchildren, walked this land in every season. I'm ready to return to the earth, to join my ancestors. What I need from you is simple. Help me manage the pain, so I can remain clear-minded. Help me stay in my home as long as possible. And when the time comes, be a witness to my passing. That's all." Over the weeks that followed, I visited Thomas 3 times a week, managing his medications, monitoring his decline, providing whatever comfort I could. But I quickly realized that Thomas was also caring for me, teaching me, preparing me for the work I had chosen. He taught me to sit in silence without feeling the need to fill it with meaningless chatter. He taught me that sometimes the best medicine is simply presence, being fully there with someone without agenda or judgment. He taught me to see death not as a failure or an enemy, but as a natural completion of life's cycle. Thomas told me stories about his life, about working as a rancher, about the traditions of his people, about the land and animals that had been his companions. He spoke about death in ways I had never heard before. "Where I'm going, it's not somewhere far away," he told me one afternoon. "It's right here, all around us, just on the other side of a thin veil. My ancestors, the animals who have died, the spirits of the land, they're all there, waiting. When I cross over, I'll join them. It's not an ending, it's a homecoming." I wanted to believe him, but my scientific training made me skeptical. Still, I listened respectfully. As November turned to December, Thomas's condition worsened. He was eating less, sleeping more, spending most of his day in a chair by the window looking out at the mountains. One day, about 3 weeks before he died, Thomas told me something that gave me chills. "The animals are coming," he said calmly. "They're gathering to see me off, to guide me on the next part of my journey." I looked out the window. I didn't see anything unusual, just the empty grassland, some trees, the distant mountains. "What animals, Thomas?" He pointed. "The deer, the eagles, the wolves. They're coming closer every day. They know. Animals always know." Over the next few days, I started to notice that Thomas was right. On each of my visits, I would see more wildlife around his property than before. Deer would stand at the edge of the clearing, watching the house. Eagles would circle overhead. One morning, I arrived to find wolf tracks in the snow around Thomas's front door, something Thomas later told me was highly unusual. "They're not afraid," Thomas explained. "They know I'm about to make the journey. In my culture, animals are our relatives, our guides. They're here to honor me and to show me the way when the time comes." Whether it was coincidence or something more, I couldn't deny what I was observing. The wildlife around Thomas's home was behaving strangely, gathering closer, watching, waiting. On December 15th, when I arrived for my morning visit, I knew immediately that Thomas had very little time left. His breathing was labored, his consciousness was fading in and out, but he was still in his chair by the window, still looking out at the land he loved. I sat beside him and took his hand. "Thomas, I'm here. You're not alone." He opened his eyes and looked at me. Clear, lucid, at peace. "Thank you, Michelle, for everything. You're going to be a good hospice nurse. You have compassion, and you're learning to see beyond what your medical books taught you. That's important in this work." He paused to catch his breath. "The veil is very thin now. I can see both sides. My wife is here. She died 8 years ago, but she's here now, young again, beautiful, waiting for me. My parents are here. And the animals, so many animals, more than you can see. They're all here to welcome me." I felt tears on my cheeks. I had grown to love this wise, gentle man. I didn't want to lose him, even though I knew that's exactly why I was there, to help him go. Thomas looked at me one more time. "Don't be sad. This is a good death. I'm ready, and I'm surrounded by love. That's all anyone can hope for." He closed his eyes then, and his breathing became very slow and peaceful. I sat with him, holding his hand, being the witness he had asked me to be. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the window, Thomas took one more breath and released it slowly, and he was gone. The moment he died, something extraordinary happened. A golden eagle, massive and magnificent, landed on the fence post directly outside the window where Thomas had been sitting. It perched there, perfectly still, looking directly into the room. At the same time, a small herd of deer emerged from the tree line and stood in a semicircle around Thomas's house. And in the distance, I heard the howl of wolves, not threatening, but mournful, like a song of farewell. I sat frozen, overwhelmed by what I was witnessing. The eagle remained on the fence post for several minutes, then spread its wings and flew off toward the mountains. The deer slowly dispersed. The wolf howls faded into silence. I had been trained to see death as a biological process. The cessation of heartbeat and breathing, the end of electrical activity in the brain. But what I had just experienced felt like something more. It felt like a ceremony, a ritual orchestrated by nature itself to honor the passing of one of its children. I performed my duties, documenting the time of death, making the necessary phone calls. Thomas's daughter arrived several hours later. She wasn't surprised by my story about the animals. "Of course they came," she said simply. "My father spent his whole life respecting and honoring the natural world. The animals knew him. They loved him. They came to see him home." That was 18 years ago, but I've never forgotten Thomas Red Bear or the lessons he taught me. Since then, I've been present at hundreds of deaths, and I've learned to pay attention to things my medical training told me were irrelevant. The way a patient's breathing synchronizes with the wind outside, the way birds gather near the windows of dying patients, the way pets behave in the hours before their owners die, becoming